And so John Templeton, who I interviewed many years ago, said to me that he for many years he used to track all of the investment decisions he'd made, and he said, I've made over 500,000 decisions, investment decisions, over the course of my lifetime. This is when he was about 86, and I was interviewing him, and he said to me, and I realized that a third of them were the opposite of wisdom, which I thought was a wonderful phrase. It's a good euphemism for, yeah, I was dead wrong. And so he said, even the smartest investors are going to be wrong a third of the time. And so this brings us back to the point that Jeff Gundlach made, which is you need to say, if I'm wrong, what's the consequence? And so I think having that humility to admit that luck plays a part, to admit that we don't know what the future holds, is a really important part of survival and resilient wealth creation. And there's a wonderful story that Joel Greenblatt told me, where he said right at the start of his career, where he ran that hedge fund that made 40% a year, he started the fund when he was about 27. And he, one of the first deals he made, it was basically, there was a company in Florida that he used to visit as a child that ran a kind of resort where there would be, I think there were Santa Claus on water skis, and there were these beautiful flamingos everywhere. And he had these very fond, sentimental memories of his parents taking him there as a kid. So he really loved the fact that then they were in this takeover deal where I think they were being bought out. And he calculated that it was really a riskless deal, that he was going to make a lot of money off this if the deal went through. There was no reason why it shouldn't go through. And then he said one day he opens the Wall Street Journal and he sees on the front page that the pavilion, the main building at this resort, has fallen into a sinkhole. And he said it would have been funny if I hadn't been so scared stiff. And it's like literally it's the very start of his career running this hedge fund, and the building has fallen into a sinkhole. And so I think it's a wonderfully comic illustration of the fact that we live in a world where things like COVID happen and where things like buildings falling into sinkholes happen. And so part of being a wise and resilient person is to set yourself up with a margin of safety so that when you're wrong or when unexpected stuff happens, you'll be okay. You'll survive. You'll survive the dips. And so I think this simple idea of wanting to stay in the game is a really distinctive approach that runs through all of the great investors. They're all setting themselves up in ways to survive over a long career. And you sometimes look at a great investor who looks great over one cycle. They have an amazing 7-year run or 13-year run or something. But then you discover actually that they weren't that great. And I guess to go back to your question at the start about how I decided who to write about, I was really interested in investors who were not just admirable human beings or wise, but had survived. Mm-hmm. Because as Jeff Gundlach said to me, longevity is the ultimate test of success in this business. It's not about doing well over 10 years. For your readers, your listeners, you want to survive over 40, 50, 60 years of investing in the market. And I think focusing on resilience and survival and avoidance of ruin is really important. But then at the same time, as Howard Marks said to me, you can become so focused on risk avoidance that it ends up being return avoidance. And so there's this beautiful paradox here that it's not about eschewing risk and avoiding all risk. What it's really about is taking intelligent risk, considered risk. And so it's kind of like during COVID, right? You want to take considered risk. You want to keep your distance. You want to wear your mask. You want to be careful. You want to wash your hands, but you don't want to stay in your home for the next 20 years. Sure you'll be safe. Sure you'll have risk avoidance, but you'll die of misery and boredom. And so this isn't about risk avoidance. It's about considered and intelligent risk, and that applies to every area of life.
Were there any lessons that you took that related to the crash around COVID, or did you speak to people around COVID and hear their thoughts specifically on what was going on?
Yeah, one of my favorite conversations about COVID. It's a strange piece of wording. Apologies for that wording. But one of the most fascinating conversations I had about COVID was with Ed Thorpe, who I I describe as probably the greatest game player in the history of investing. And this is a guy who, I mean, he's just a total genius. He figured out, for one thing, how to count cards. He's the inventor of that approach, I gather, where he figured out how to beat the casino at blackjack. Then he figures out how to beat the casino at roulette by creating this wearable computer that he put in. He would activate it with the big toe in his shoe, so he could actually figure out how the ball was kind of flying around the rotator wheel and where it was likely to fall out of the 38 pockets on the roulette wheel. So here's a guy who's a genius at stacking the odds in his favor. So when I was putting the finishing touches on the book, I called about 16 of the investors I'd written about to ask them about COVID and to see how they'd been dealing with it. And I said to him, so how did you handle COVID? How did you think about it? And this is in the midst of it. This is a few months after, this is probably around June 2020. So a few months after it had kind of really ripped through the US. And he said to me, thank you for asking. And he proceeded to explain in this incredible way how he had basically started, I think in about January 2020, when there hadn't been a single death in the US reported. He already basically started to analyze the data coming out of Wuhan in China and to figure out independently what the likely true fatality rate was. Then he makes all of these inferences from the 1918 flu pandemic, which had actually killed his grandfather. So he understood the way that the pandemic spread because he understands numbers. And he gathers his family together. And this is in early February 2020, still before a single death had been reported in the US. And he says, over the next 12 months, we're going to see 200,000 to 500,000 deaths in the US alone from this new coronavirus. And we need to start getting supplies in and taking precautions. And so a month before all of the shelves started to get cleaned out in stores of detergents and hand wipes and masks and stuff like that, he and his family very quietly went and bought masks and detergent and hand wipes and hand wash. And he places himself in isolation with his wife in their beautiful house overlooking the beach in California. Because he said, look, I'm 86 years old. I have no comorbidities. I'm very fit. I run 21 marathons. But he said, my odds of dying if I get COVID are somewhere between 2 and 4%. And so if you think about this, it's a really beautiful illustration of how the great investors think. He's analyzing the evidence, the data, in this totally dispassionate way. He's not listening to what the politicians are saying. He's thinking for himself, and he's avoiding catastrophe. He's saying, okay, if I get this, here are the odds of me dying. Let me take these precautions. And he said, it's not about being afraid. I'm not afraid. But he said, 2 to 4% chance of dying is actually pretty high, and I need to survive this period. And so it's the avoidance of catastrophe, the thinking for yourself, the analyzing the data, and in a dispassionate way. And also, one of the most distinctive things about the great investors is there's always this emphasis on what you might describe as asymmetric bets, right? So you don't want to make a bet where there's unbelievable downside and minimal upside. You want to make bets where there's minimal downside and huge upside. And so something like COVID for Ed Thorpe, he's making a bet where he's saying, well, the downside here, if I'm wrong, is that I die. Let me just avoid that catastrophe. Let me stay in the game. And I would say that was absolutely critical to the way that he played roulette, to the way he played blackjack, and then to the way he operated when he had a hedge fund, where he didn't have a losing quarter in 20 years, that he was just trying to stay in the game and have so it's kind of like Joe Greenblatt said, that if you don't lose money, all of the other options are good. Likewise with COVID, if you don't die and you survive,
to that
you're ahead of the game.
You guys, if you enjoyed this video and you feel it was valuable in teaching you more about how to invest, hit the like button and please share the video with your friends. And if you want more investing content, subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to click the button on the screen. We got a free gift for you. Thanks again for watching.